The sky over the Great Plains stretched wide and endless, a pale blue dome that seemed to hold the entire world in its palm. On a gravel road outside the small town of Gothenburg, Nebraska, a farmer named Harold Jensen stood at the edge of his cornfield, watching a line of yellow bulldozers crawling across the prairie like a herd of prehistoric beasts. It was the summer of 1956, and the machines were carving a four-lane ribbon of concrete straight through his neighbor's land. Harold had heard rumors about this for years, about something called the Interstate Highway System, about a road so wide and so fast that it would slice through the heart of the Great Plains like a knife through butter. But seeing it happen was something else. The dust rose in thick brown clouds, and the roar of engines mixed with the screech of metal scraping against ancient soil. He leaned on his fence post and spat into the dirt. "That road's going to change everything," he muttered to no one in particular. He was more right than he could have ever imagined. Before that summer, before the bulldozers and the surveyors and the government men in crisp suits, the Great Plains had been a landscape shaped by slow movement. For centuries, the only highways were the trails worn by bison and the footpaths of Native Americans. The Pawnee, the Cheyenne, the Sioux, and the Arapaho moved with the seasons, following herds and rivers, covering vast distances on foot or horseback. Then came the settlers, crossing the plains in covered wagons along the Oregon Trail and the Mormon Pioneer Trail. They followed the Platte River through Nebraska, a shallow, muddy artery that meandered across the flatlands like a lazy snake. The wagons moved at a pace of about 2 miles an hour, and a trip from Omaha to Cheyenne could take 2 months. Then the railroads arrived in the 1860s, stitching the plains together with iron rails. The transcontinental railroad sliced travel time from months to days, and towns sprouted along the tracks like mushrooms after rain. Every 10 miles or so, a depot would appear, and around that depot, grain elevators, general stores, blacksmith shops, and saloons would cluster. Small farming towns like Gothenburg, North Platte, and Ogallala became vital nodes in a network of commerce and community. For 70 years, the railroad was the spine of the Great Plains. Then came the automobile. By the 1920s, cars were no longer a rich man's toy. They were becoming a necessity for millions of Americans, including the farmers and ranchers of the plains. But the roads were terrible. Most were unpaved, rutted tracks that turned to mud after a rain. In 1919, a young Army officer named Dwight D. Eisenhower drove a military convoy from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. The trip took 62 days. The convoy crawled at an average speed of 5 miles per hour, and the roads across the plains were among the worst. Eisenhower never forgot that experience. 37 years later, as President of the United States, he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. It was the largest public works project in American history. Its official name was the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways, but everyone called it the Interstate. The plan was to build 41,000 miles of superhighways that would connect every major city in the country, and through the middle of it all, running east to west, would be Interstate 80. Interstate 80 was not just any highway. It was the direct descendant of the old transcontinental routes. It followed roughly the same corridor as the Lincoln Highway, the first improved road across the country. But where the Lincoln Highway was a 2-lane affair with sharp curves and countless intersections, 80 was a controlled access, divided highway with 4, 6, sometimes even 8 lanes. It was designed for speed. The speed limit in the early days was 70 miles per hour, and the road was built to handle heavy trucks. You could drive from New York City to San Francisco in under 5 days. And the part of the journey across the Great Plains, from the Missouri River near Omaha to the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming, became a smooth, unbroken ribbon of concrete that stretched for nearly 500 miles. For the small towns of the Great Plains, that ribbon was both a blessing and a curse. Take the town of Ogallala, Nebraska, for example. In the 1950s, Ogallala was a classic cow town. It sat right on the old Lincoln Highway, and it had a thriving main street with a hardware store, a drugstore, a hotel, and 3 cafes. Travelers driving across the country would stop in Ogallala for gas, for a meal, for a motel room. The town had a population of about 4,000, and it was growing. When the interstate came through, it did not go through Ogallala. It bypassed the town, skirting about 3 miles to the north. The exit was there, a concrete off-ramp that led to a 2-lane road into the town, but most travelers never took it. Why would you? The highway had everything you needed. At the interchange itself, within a few years, a gas station appeared, then a motel, then a diner, and then another gas station, another motel, another diner. Within 10 years, the Ogallala interchange was a cluster of businesses that served the highway travelers, and the old main street of Ogallala began to wither. The hardware store closed, the hotel closed, the 3 cafes became 2, then 1, then none. The population of the town actually increased because people moved to the interchange area, but the heart of the old town beat weaker with every passing year. The same story played out across the Great Plains. From the flat fields of western Iowa to the high plains of Wyoming, towns that had been built around the railroad and the old two-lane highways found themselves bypassed. The interstate was faster, it was safer, and it bypassed the clutter of small towns. That was the whole point. The interstate was designed to move traffic, not to serve communities. And in that design, it rewrote the geography of the Great Plains. The towns that survived and even thrived were the ones that had an exit, the ones that didn't slowly dried up. The highway became a new kind of main street, but it was a main street composed entirely of interchanges. Every 10 or 20 miles, a green sign would announce the next exit, and at that exit you would find a gas station, a fast food restaurant, a motel, and a truck stop. The same signs, the same logos, the same buildings, repeated like a mantra across 1,000 miles of prairie. For the ranchers and farmers who lived along the highway, the change was just as profound. Before the interstate, if you needed to haul a load of cattle to the stockyards in Omaha, you drove a 2-lane road, winding through towns, stopping for traffic lights, slowing down for school buses. The trip could take 8 hours. On the interstate, that same trip took 5 hours. And you could drive at night without worrying about deer or drunk drivers because the highway was divided, well-lit, and straight. The trucking industry exploded. Before the interstate, about 70% of freight moved by rail. By the 1970s, that number had flipped, with trucks carrying the majority. The interstate turned the Great Plains into a time-saving machine. A farmer could sell his corn to a buyer in Denver and have it there the next morning. A rancher could ship a load of calves to a feedlot in Texas in a day. The highway shrank the distances, but it also changed what those distances meant. Think about the town of North Platte, Nebraska. North Platte sits at the junction of the North and South Platte rivers, and it has been a transportation hub since the days of the Oregon Trail. The Union Pacific Railroad built a major rail yard there in the 1860s. For 100 years, the railroad was the town's lifeblood. When 80 was built, it passed just south of North Platte and the town got an exit. But North Platte was different from Ogallala. It was bigger and it had the rail yard. The interstate did not kill the railroad. It complemented it. Trucking companies set up terminals in North Platte. Warehouses were built along the frontage roads. The town became a logistics hub. Today, North Platte has a population of about 24,000 and its economy is still strong. But the character of the town changed. The old downtown with its brick buildings and historic storefronts is quiet. The action is out by the interstate, where the truck stops and the travel centers and the fast food chains compete for business. And then there is the effect of the interstate on the land itself. The Great Plains is a vast, open landscape. Before the highway, driving across it was a slow reveal. You saw the world as a series of small towns and farms, each one distinct. You might stop in a little town like Maxwell or Hershey or Brady and see the grain elevator, the bank, the church. You might talk to the old man at the gas station who knew everyone in town. The interstate changed all that. Now, when you drive across the plains, you see mostly the highway and the sky. The towns are out of view, hidden behind the exits. You see the big green signs that announce the next services. You see the billboards, which have become a kind of visual poetry of the plains. Billboards advertising the Wall Drug in South Dakota, or the Carhenge Monument, or the world's largest prairie dog. But you do not see the people. The highway flattens the experience. It turns the Great Plains into a place you pass through, not a place you stop. Yet the interstate also brought opportunity. For Native American communities, the highway cut through reservations and opened up new economic possibilities. The highway allowed tourists to reach places like the Black Hills of South Dakota or the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, but it also brought disruption. Land was taken by eminent domain. Sacred sites were paved over. The highway was not just a road, it was a statement of power. It said that the federal government could reshape the land any way it wanted. For the tribes, that was a familiar story. By the 1970s, the interstate had become the backbone of the Great Plains. It was hard to imagine the region without it. And yet, the highway had not just changed how people moved. It had changed how they thought about time and distance. Before the interstate, a trip from Omaha to Cheyenne was an adventure. Now it was a drive. You could leave Omaha at 7 in the morning, stop for lunch at a rest area near Lexington, fill up with gas at the Flying J in Ogallala, and be in Cheyenne by 3 in the afternoon. The highway had made the vastness of the plains manageable, but it had also made it less mysterious. Harold Jensen, the farmer who watched the bulldozers in 1956, lived long enough to see the full transformation. He died in 2004 at the age of 92. By then, 80 was a permanent scar across his old cornfield. The neighbor's land that was taken for the highway became a truck stop and a casino. Harold's own children had moved away, one to Denver, one to Phoenix. They drove the interstate to visit him, and they complained about the traffic in the cities. But they were grateful for the road. It allowed them to come home in one day instead of two. When Harold was a boy, the world had been huge and slow. By the time he was an old man, the world had shrunk. The highway was the reason. Now, as we drive across the Great Plains today, we might not think twice about the concrete beneath our tires. We might see it as just a road, a way to get from one place to another. But the interstate is so much more than that. It is the longest, widest monument to a vision of progress. It is a testament to the idea that human beings can reshape the land to suit their needs, and in the Great Plains, that reshaping was profound. The highway turned the region from a collection of isolated communities into a corridor. It created winners and losers. It accelerated the decline of small towns and the rise of big cities. It made the truck driver king and the railroad a relic. It gave us the rest area, the interchange, the exit ramp. It gave us the 24-hour truck stop with the all-you-can-eat buffet and the 50-foot-tall neon sign. It gave us the ability to cross the Great Plains in a single day, and in doing so, it changed the very meaning of the Great Plains. No longer a place to settle, it became a place to cross. But not everyone crossed. There were those who stayed, who lived in the small towns that hung on like a weed in the crack of the pavement. Those towns, the ones that couldn't get an exit, found new ways to survive. Some became tourist attractions, marketing themselves as authentic slices of Americana. Some became bedroom communities for the bigger towns. Some just faded away, their grain elevators abandoned, their main streets boarded up. The highway demanded a choice, adapt or die, and many of the small towns of the Great Plains chose to die. That is the story we are going to explore in this episode. The story of a highway that cut through the heart of the plains, linking coasts and changing lives. The highway that changed everything. We will look at the towns that were bypassed and the towns that were born at the exits. We will talk to the truckers who made the highway their home and the farmers who had to learn to live with the noise. We will examine the economics, the politics, and the culture of the interstate. And we will ask a question that is not often asked. What did the highway take away? To understand the impact, we must go back to a time before the highway existed. We must imagine the Great Plains as they were in 1955, before the bulldozers came. A world of dirt roads and gravel lanes, of two-lane blacktops that curved gently across the prairie, following the contours of the land. A world where every small town had a main street with a hardware store, a grocery store, a cafe, a barbershop. A world where the train whistle was the sound of connection. In that world, distances were measured not in miles but in hours, and the hours were long. A trip of 100 miles was an all-day affair. You packed a lunch. You brought a blanket for the kids. You stopped at every town because you had to. The highway changed that. It made distance irrelevant. And in making distance irrelevant, it made the small town irrelevant. That is the heart of this story. The highway did not just change the Great Plains. It erased a way of life. It replaced it with something new, something faster, something colder. But it also opened up possibilities. It allowed people to move more freely, to find jobs, to connect with family. It is a story of trade-offs, and like any story of the American West, it is a story of power, money, and the land. The interstate highway system was a product of the Cold War. President Eisenhower sold it as a defense measure, a way to evacuate cities in case of nuclear attack and to move troops quickly. But once built, it became a tool of everyday commerce. And in the Great Plains, commerce was everything. The highway turned the region into a warehouse. Today, you can stand on a hill near the Nebraska-Wyoming border and watch the trucks roll by, one after another, a stream of commerce that never stops. Those trucks carry corn, wheat, beef, coal, wind turbine blades. They carry the wealth of the plains to the rest of the country. The highway is the artery, and the plains are the heart, but the heart is changing. Climate change, depopulation, the rise of automation in farming and trucking, all of these are reshaping the Great Plains once again. The highway that changed everything may soon be just a memory of an older era. For now, though, Interstate 80 remains the spine of the plains. It is a road that tells a story, and that story begins in the summer of 1956 with a farmer and a bulldozer and a vision of a world made smaller. This is the story of the highway that changed the Great Plains, but every story has its characters, and the characters of the Great Plains Interstate are as varied as the landscape itself. To understand what the highway truly meant, we need to ride with someone who lives on it. Let me introduce you to a truck driver named Marvin Caldwell. Marvin has been hauling freight across the plains for 30 years, ever since he got out of the Army in the early 90s. He runs a route from Omaha to Salt Lake City, twice a week, every week. He knows every inch of Interstate 80 between mile marker 0 in California and mile marker 450 in Nebraska. He knows which rest areas have the cleanest bathrooms, which truck stops serve the best coffee, and which stretches of road are most likely to have deer crossing at dusk. To Marvin, the highway is not a monument or a scar. It is his office. It is his home. Marvin starts his day at 3 in the morning. He pulls out of the truck stop in Council Bluffs, Iowa, crosses the Missouri River into Nebraska, and heads west. The first hour is dark and quiet. The headlights cut a tunnel through the night. The only sound is the hum of the diesel engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. Marvin listens to the chatter of other drivers, the ones hauling livestock, the ones carrying hazardous materials, the ones running hot with a load of produce that needs to reach a warehouse in Denver by noon. They talk about construction delays, speed traps, the price of fuel. They talk about the weather because weather on the plains is never just weather. It is a force. Blizzards, tornadoes, thunderstorms that drop hail the size of golf balls. Marvin has seen it all. He has been stranded in a whiteout near Sidney, Nebraska, for 18 hours. He has driven through a microburst that nearly flipped his trailer. He has learned to respect the sky. By sunrise, Marvin is near Grand Island. The sun comes up flat and wide across the cornfields, painting the sky in layers of peach and gold. This is his favorite part of the day. The world feels new. The highway stretches ahead, straight and true, and for a few minutes Marvin forgets the grind. He remembers why he became a trucker in the first place. The freedom, the solitude, the sense of being untethered. In a truck, you are not tied to a desk or a town or a routine. You are a ghost on the concrete, moving through the lives of others without touching them. But that freedom comes with a cost. Marvin has missed birthdays and anniversaries. His ex-wife once told him that he loved the road more than he loved her. He did not argue. The road is demanding. It asks for your attention every second. One lapse in concentration and you are in the median or worse. Marvin has seen the aftermath of too many accidents, the twisted metal, the flashing lights, the plastic sheeting laid over a car. He knows that the highway can kill you just as easily as it can carry you to a paycheck. Yet Marvin keeps driving. He says it is in his blood. His father was a trucker, and his grandfather drove a wagon team across the same plains 100 years ago. The road changed from dirt to gravel to asphalt to concrete, but the instinct remained the same: keep moving. That is the ethos of the Great Plains. Movement is survival. The highway made movement easier, faster, and more efficient, but it also made it lonely. When Marvin parks his rig at a rest area near Ogallala, he eats his dinner alone. He calls his daughter on his phone, but the connection is often spotty. He watches other drivers come and go, each one a stranger. The truck stop is a transient city. Everyone is passing through. No one stays. That transience is the highway's gift and its curse. For the towns that were bypassed, the loneliness was geographical. For the truckers, it is existential. They are the nomads of the 21st century, carrying the nation's goods but never belonging to any place. And the highway is the only home they know. Let me tell you about one of those towns that was bypassed. It is a place called Arthur, Nebraska. Arthur is in the Sandhills, a region of rolling dunes covered in grass, one of the most sparsely populated areas in the lower 48. In the 1950s, Arthur had a population of about 300 people. It had a school, a bank, a hardware store, a cafe, and a grain elevator. It was a quiet town, the kind where everybody knew everybody. The main road through town was a two-lane state highway that connected to U.S. Route 30, the Lincoln Highway. When Interstate 80 was planned, it was routed about 30 miles south of Arthur. The town lobbied hard for an interchange, but the State Highway Department said no. The traffic projections did not justify the cost. So Interstate 80 went straight past Arthur, invisible to the drivers who zoomed through the Sandhills without ever knowing the town existed. The effect was slow but certain. First thing to go was the gas station. Travelers no longer needed to stop in Arthur because they could fill up at the chain stations near the interstate exits. Then the cafe closed, then the hardware store. The school consolidated with a district 20 miles away. By the 1980s, Arthur's population had dropped to under 100. The grain elevator still operates, but only because a few local ranchers ship their cattle to a feedlot near Ogallala. The town is a ghost of itself. The buildings are still there, but many are boarded up. The main street is quiet except for the wind. I visited Arthur a few years ago. I met an old rancher named Dale who had lived there his whole life. He told me that the interstate did not kill his town, it just made it irrelevant. We were already dying, he said. The highway just made it faster. Dale's children all moved away. One works for a tech company in Denver. Another is a nurse in Omaha. They come home for Christmas, but they always leave. There are no jobs in Arthur. The land is too fragile for intensive farming, and the cattle ranching is done by a few families who are getting older. Dale is 72. He does not know who will take over his herd when he retires. Arthur is not unique. There are hundreds of towns like it across the Great Plains. The highway created a map that rewarded proximity to exits and punished isolation. It was a map drawn by engineers and politicians, not by the people who lived on the land. And once that map was printed in concrete, it became reality. The small towns that were left off the map had to invent new reasons to exist. Some became bedroom communities. Some turned to tourism. Some became retirement destinations for people who wanted cheap land and quiet skies. But many just faded away, their wooden storefronts rotting in the sun. Yet there is another side to this story. The highway also created towns. Places that were nothing but a wheat field in 1956 became exits with truck stops, hotels, fast food joints, and casinos. One of those places is the town of 80's own creation, the community of Waco, Nebraska. Wait, no, Waco was already there. Let me think of a better example. The town of York, Nebraska, had an exit built near it, and it thrived. But the most dramatic example might be the complex of services at the interchange of 80 and Nebraska Highway 2, near the town of Kearney. That exit became a small city of its own, with a Cabela's outdoor superstore, multiple motels, and a complex of restaurants. It is a place that exists only because of the interstate. The land was cheap, the traffic was guaranteed, and the businesses came. For the entrepreneurs who built those exits, the highway was an opportunity. They could tap into the stream of travelers and truckers passing by, offering them a place to eat, sleep, and spend money. The truck stops grew into empires. The Flying J, the Petro, the TA, they became landmarks. They offered showers, laundry, television lounges, and all-you-can-eat buffets. They became communities of their own, temporary but real. For a trucker like Marvin, the truck stop is a surrogate town. He knows the cashiers by name. He has his favorite parking spot. He has a routine. But these highway-born towns also changed the culture of the plains. They homogenized it. You could drive from Pennsylvania to Oregon and see the same signs, the same logos, the same menu items. The local diner with the homemade pie and the hand-painted sign disappeared. In its place came a Subway and a McDonald's. The highway made the Great Plains look like everywhere else. It smoothed out the quirks and the oddities, replacing them with a uniform strip of commerce that catered to the traveler who wanted no surprises. That uniformity was not just aesthetic, it was economic. The money that used to be spent in small towns was now spent at the exits. The tax revenue went to the counties that hosted the interchanges, not to the inland towns. The wealth of the plains became concentrated along the concrete ribbon. It was a redistribution of prosperity that left many communities behind. And then there is the environmental cost. The interstate did not just reshape human geography, it reshaped the land itself. To build the highway, engineers cut through hills, filled in valleys, and drained wetlands. They created embankments that blocked natural water flow. They built bridges that changed how streams and rivers moved. The concrete and asphalt absorbed heat, creating microclimates along the roadside. The highway became a barrier for wildlife. Pronghorn antelope, who had roamed freely across the plains for millennia, found their migration paths interrupted. They could not cross the 4 lanes of traffic. Some populations became isolated, leading to genetic bottlenecks. The highway also brought invasive plants. The seeds of weeds like cheatgrass and leafy spurge hitched rides on trucks and tires. They took root in the disturbed soil along the right-of-way. They spread into the native prairie, changing the composition of the grasslands. The highway was a corridor not just for people, but for plants and animals that had never lived in the Great Plains before. Some of those invaders thrived. Others died, but the ecosystem was altered in ways that are still unfolding. I remember talking to a biologist named Dr. Ellen Reyes, who studied the ecology of roadside Nebraska. She told me that the interstate was the longest unmowed lawn in the state. The Department of Transportation maintained it, but only just. The strips of grass along the highway became habitat for small mammals, birds, and insects. They were narrow ribbons of wilderness in a sea of farmland. In a way, the highway created new ecosystems as it destroyed others. But the most profound change was inside the human mind. The highway changed how people thought about the Great Plains. Before the interstate, the plains were a destination. People settled there. They built towns and stayed. The highway turned the plains into a passage. It became something you drove through on your way to somewhere else. The coasts mattered more than the middle. the cities on the edges grew, and the heartland shrank. I think about Harold Jensen, the farmer we met at the beginning, who watched the bulldozers in 1956. He saw the highway as a scar, but maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was a symbol of a new relationship between humans and the land. The land was no longer something you lived with, it was something you conquered. The highway was a tool of conquest. It flattened the hills, straightened the curves, and made the vastness manageable. It was a triumph of engineering, but it was also a loss of connection. When I drive across the plains today, I feel that loss. I see the big sky and the endless fields, but I also see the isolation. The towns are hidden. The people are tucked away. The highway offers efficiency, not intimacy. It offers speed, not understanding. And I wonder if we have lost something that cannot be measured in miles per hour. But I also recognize that the highway is not going anywhere. It is too deeply embedded in the economy and the culture. The trucks will keep rolling. The truckers will keep driving. The small towns will keep fading or reinventing themselves. The Great Plains will continue to change. And the interstate will be part of that change, for better or for worse. There is a road sign near the Nebraska-Wyoming border that always makes me pause. It says home of the world's largest prairie dog. It is a billboard for a tourist trap, a giant fiberglass prairie dog that stands 30 feet tall. It is kitschy and ridiculous, but it is also a statement. It says that even in a world of concrete and speed, there is still room for whimsy, for the absurd, for the local. The highway may try to homogenize everything, but the Great Plains resist. They have a way of asserting their own character, of reminding you that you are not just anywhere. You are here in a place with a history, with a past, with stories. And that is what this podcast is about, the stories. The stories of the people who lived through the change, who adapted, who resisted, who thrived, or who simply endured. The highway that changed the Great Plains is not just a road. It is a character in the ongoing drama of the American West, and the drama is far from over. Let me tell you about one more person. Her name is Doris McCrea. She is 86 years old and lives in a town called Gothenburg, Nebraska. Gothenburg is on Interstate 80, but it also has a historic downtown that survived the highway. Doris remembers the day the interstate opened in 1966. She was a young mother then with 2 children. She and her husband owned a small grocery store on Main Street. The highway brought new customers, but it also brought competition. Big chain stores opened near the exit. Doris and her husband had to adapt. They started offering delivery to the travelers who could not leave their rigs. They began stocking specialty items that the chains did not carry. They survived. Doris is proud of her town. She says the interstate gave Gothenburg a new lease on life. The town hosts a popular festival every summer that draws tourists from all over. The hotels are full. The restaurants are busy. But Doris also acknowledges the darker side. She has seen friends move away. She has seen the downtown struggle to compete with the exit. She has seen her own children leave for college and not come back. The highway that brought visitors also took away her kids. It's a trade-off, she told me. You can't have everything. That is the lesson of the interstate highway system in the Great Plains. It gave us mobility, commerce, and connection. It took away stability, community, and solitude. It was a trade-off that we made as a nation, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. And now, as we look to the future, we have to decide if it was worth it. The highway is still there, of course. It is still the spine of the plains, but the world around it is shifting. Climate change is bringing longer droughts and more intense storms. The water in the Ogallala Aquifer is running low. The population of the plains continues to decline. Automation is threatening the jobs of truckers like Marvin. The towns that survived the interstate may not survive what comes next. Yet, as I drive down the road, I see signs of resilience. I see wind turbines rising from the plains, a new kind of harvest. I see solar farms spreading across former wheat fields. I see communities banding together to create broadband networks, turning the highway of information into a new kind of connection. The Great Plains are reinventing themselves once again. And the interstate, that old concrete ribbon, is still there, carrying the past into the future. This is the story of the highway that changed the Great Plains. But it is also the story of the people who lived along it, who crossed it, who fought it, and who loved it. It is a story of concrete and sky, of loneliness and freedom, of loss and hope. And it is a story that is still being written. The highway that changed the Great Plains did not only transform the lives of farmers and truckers and small-town grocers. It also reshaped the world of the people who had been there long before any European settler arrived, long before the plow broke the sod. The Native American tribes of the Great Plains have a relationship with the land that is older than memory, and the interstate cut through their reservations as surely as it cut through the prairie. I spent time with a man named Joseph Red Cloud, a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. He is not old enough to remember the buffalo, but he remembers when the interstate came. He was a boy in the early 1960s, when the surveys began, when the engineers arrived with their maps and their stakes. He told me that the elders in the community were deeply suspicious. The land is sacred, they said. The Black Hills are the heart of everything that is. But the highway did not go through the Black Hills. It went through the reservation, a strip of land that had already been broken by treaties and broken promises. The interstate, he said, was another kind of treaty. It was a promise of progress, of connection to the rest of America. But for the Lakota, connection was not always a good thing. The highway brought tourists, yes, but it also brought outsiders who did not understand the culture. It brought bootleggers and drugs. It brought the outside world rushing in, and the outside world was not always kind. Joseph told me about a stretch of Interstate 90 that runs near the reservation. He said that whenever a car broke down or a truck overturned, the authorities would call the tribal police. But the tribal police had no jurisdiction over the white travelers. They could only watch. The highway was a no-man's land, a strip of asphalt that belonged to the state, not to the people who had lived there for centuries. I asked him if the highway had any positive impact. He thought for a long time. Then he said that it made it easier for the young people to leave. They could get on the highway and drive to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or even Denver. They could escape the poverty, the alcoholism, the despair. But they also left behind the traditions, the language, the ceremonies. The highway was an escape route, but also a one-way street. Many never came back. The reservation became a place you drove through, not a place you returned to. Joseph is a historian now, teaching at a community college. He takes his students on field trips along the interstate. He shows them the prairie dogs and the buttes, but he also shows them the ghost towns that were once thriving native communities. He tells them that the highway is a scar, but it is also a reminder that the land is still here, that the people are still here. The Lakota have survived the buffalo extermination, the boarding schools, the forced relocation. They will survive the interstate too, but survival is not the same as thriving. And the highway, in its cold efficiency, has made it harder for small communities of all kinds to thrive. I remember a town in Kansas called Grainville. It was a farming community, maybe 300 people. When the interstate came through, it bypassed the town entirely. The exit was 5 miles away. The gas stations and motels that might have sprung up around the exit instead clustered near the junction with a state highway. Grainville was left isolated like an island in a sea of farmland. The population declined. The school closed. The grocery store shut down. The only businesses left were a feed store and a bar. The people who stayed were the ones who could not leave. They were the old, the poor, the stubborn. I talked to a woman named Mabel Pickford, who was 92 at the time. She had lived in Grainville her entire life. She remembered when the town was bustling, when the railroad brought in goods and people. She remembered the Saturday dances, the county fair, the church socials. She said that when the interstate opened, she thought it would bring new life. Instead, it took the life away. The young people drove out on the highway and never came back. The travelers on the highway did not stop. They did not even know Grainville existed. It was just a name on a map, a dot they passed at 70 miles an hour. Mabel died the year after I met her. Her obituary in the local paper said she was a lifelong resident. It did not mention the highway, but it did mention that her grandchildren lived in Denver and Seattle. The highway was the thread that connected them, but it was also the thread that unraveled the fabric of her life. There is a counterpoint to that story, of course. Some towns did not just survive the interstate, they thrived. Take North Platte, Nebraska. It is home to a huge rail yard and a major truck stop. The interstate brought so much business that the town expanded, but the expansion was not organic. It was shaped by the highway. The new developments, the gas stations, the fast food restaurants, the motels clustered along the exits. The old downtown withered. The historic buildings stood empty. The chain stores and franchises replaced the locally owned shops. The town became a generic version of itself, a place that could be anywhere in America. The people of North Platte still have a sense of identity, but it is an identity shaped by the highway. They are known as a stopping point, a place to rest, a place to refuel. That is a kind of success, but it is a hollow one. The interstate did not just change towns. It changed the very nature of travel. Before the highway, a journey across the Great Plains was an adventure. You took the two-lane roads, you went through every small town, you saw the grain elevators and the water towers and the county courthouses. You pulled over at fruit stands and roadside attractions. You talked to people. You learned the stories. The interstate eliminated all of that. It gave you speed, but it took away the journey. The landscape became a blur. The towns became signs. The people became invisible. I am thinking of a particular stretch of Interstate 70 in Colorado, where the highway follows the South Platte River through the eastern plains. It is a monotonous drive, flat and straight. The only landmarks are the occasional windbreak and the distant line of the Rocky Mountains. But if you get off the highway and take the old frontage road, you find a different world. There are little villages like Wiggins and Fort Morgan, places that still have a downtown with a hardware store and a cafe and a barber shop. The people there are friendly. They wave at strangers. They know each other's names. It is a world that the interstate has forgotten, a world that is slowly dying. But is it dying because of the interstate or in spite of it? I have struggled with that question. The highway is a symbol of progress, but progress is not always good. It is a trade-off. We traded community for mobility. We traded belonging for freedom, and we are still living with the consequences. In the years since the interstate was built, the Great Plains have lost more than half their population. The small towns that survived are smaller. The ones that did not survive are ghost towns, their empty storefronts a testament to the highway's power. But the highway is not the only cause. The mechanization of agriculture, the consolidation of farms, the decline of the railroad, all those factors played a role. The interstate was just the final nail in the coffin. I have been thinking about that phrase, final nail in the coffin. It is grim, but it is accurate. The highway made it possible for people to leave, and once they left, they did not come back. The economy of the plains shifted from local to global. The wheat grown in Kansas was shipped to ports on the coasts. The cattle raised in Nebraska were slaughtered in plants far away. The people who did the work were replaced by machines. The towns that depended on them withered. But the highway also made it possible for the plains to survive in a new way. It brought tourism. It brought trucking. It brought wind energy and solar farms. The plains are now a source of renewable energy, and the interstate is the conduit for the components and the workers. The wind turbines that dot the horizon are a new kind of crop, harvested by blades and magnets instead of combines. The highway carries the blades, the towers, the technicians. It is a strange irony. The same road that emptied the plains is now helping to repopulate them with a new kind of infrastructure. I drove along Interstate 80 in Wyoming recently, past the coal mines and the wind farms, past the Antelope Creek exit, where there is nothing but a gravel road and a sign. The wind was blowing hard, as it always does in Wyoming. The turbines were spinning, their blades slicing the air. I pulled over at a rest stop and walked out onto the prairie. The grass was dry and brown. The sky was enormous. The highway was a straight line behind me, and the wind turbines were a straight line ahead. It felt like standing at the intersection of two different centuries, the century of concrete and the century of carbon-free energy. But the people are still leaving. The young people still get on the highway and go. I met a young man named Tyler at a truck stop in Ogallala, Nebraska. He was 24, working as a long-haul trucker. He told me he had grown up on a farm near Broken Bow. His family had farmed the same land for 4 generations, but farming was no longer viable. The prices were too low, the costs too high. He had to leave. He got his commercial driver's license and hit the road. He drives a refrigerated truck, hauling meat and produce. He is on the road 3 weeks out of 4. He has a girlfriend in California, but he sees her only a few days a month. He is lonely, but he says he likes the freedom, the independence, the open road. He is a modern cowboy, riding a steel horse instead of a real one. I asked him if he ever thinks about coming back to the plains permanently. He shook his head. There is nothing for me there, he said. The farm is gone. The town is shrinking. My parents are still there, but they are getting older. I could go back and take care of them, but then what would I do? There are no jobs. The highway is my home now. That is the new reality of the Great Plains. The highway is not just a road. It is a lifeline, a way of life. It is the place where people live, work, and dream. The truckers are the new inhabitants of the plains, a mobile population that never stays in one place. Their home is the cab of a semi, and their landscape is the asphalt and the sky. I think about the future. Will the highway always be the spine of the plains, or will new technologies make it obsolete? Self-driving trucks, autonomous vehicles, drones, they could change everything. If the trucks drive themselves, there will be no need for truck stops, for motels, for rest areas. The human element will be stripped away. The highway will become a purely mechanical corridor, a strip of concrete with no stories, no characters, no warmth, but maybe not. Maybe the highway will adapt. Maybe the rest stops will become charging stations for electric trucks. Maybe the small towns will reinvent themselves as hubs for renewable energy. Maybe the people will come back, drawn by the beauty of the land, the cheapness of the rent, the quiet of the night. I am an optimist, but I am also a realist. The Great Plains have always been a place of cycles, boom and bust, wet and dry, growth and decline. The highway is just another part of that cycle. I I remember a conversation with an old farmer named Dave who lived near the Nebraska sandhills. He was in his 80s, still working the land. He told me that when the interstate was built, he thought it was the end of the world, but now he says it is just a road. It is a tool like a plow or a tractor. It can be used for good or for evil. He chooses to see it as a tool of opportunity. He ships his cattle on the interstate. He buys his supplies from towns that are only an hour away instead of a day. He has traveled to see his grandchildren in Oregon, driving all the way on the interstate. He told me that the highway gave him freedom, not just for his goods, but for his dreams. His perspective is one I try to hold onto. The highway is not simply a villain. It is a force of change, and change is not inherently good or bad. It is what we make of it. The people of the Great Plains have always been resilient. They have survived drought, dust storms, economic collapse. They will survive the interstate too. They will adapt. They will find new ways to connect, to grow, to live. As I drive the final miles of my journey, I am filled with a sense of awe. The highway stretches ahead, a gray ribbon in a green or brown landscape. The sky is impossibly large. The wind is constant. The towns are small and scattered. The people are few, but the stories are many. Every exit, every mile marker, every rest stop has a story. And those stories are what make the Great Plains more than just a place you pass through. They make it a place you remember. I stop at a rest area near the border of Kansas and Colorado. There is a plaque there dedicated to the builders of the interstate. It lists the names of the engineers, the surveyors, the laborers who poured the concrete. It is a monument to human ambition, but I look past the plaque at the prairie beyond. I see a jackrabbit sitting still, watching the traffic. I see a hawk circling high above. I see the grass bending in the wind. The highway is here, but the land is still here too. And the land is older, deeper, more patient than any road. The highway changed the Great Plains, but it did not destroy them. The plains are still vast. The sky is still big. The people are still tough, and the stories keep coming. That is the real story of the highway that changed the Great Plains, not just the transformation of a region, but the endurance of a spirit. The concrete will crack, the asphalt will fade, but the land and the people will remain always, forever. And that is where I leave you, traveler. The highway awaits. The road is calling. But remember, the journey is not just about the destination. It is about the people you meet, the places you see, the stories you carry with you. Drive safe, drive slow. And when you get to the next exit, look around. There is a world out there, hidden just beyond the noise of the traffic. It is the world of the Great Plains, a world that the highway changed, but a world that will never be forgotten. I pulled off the highway one evening near the town of Hayes Center in southwestern Nebraska, just as the sun was setting. The town is tiny, with a population that hovers around 250, and the main street is barely a block long. I stopped at a diner called Dot's Place, a white clapboard building with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. Inside, the air smelled of frying hamburgers and stale coffee. A few locals sat at the counter, and a waitress named Carol was wiping down the counter with a rag. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and a kind face, and she had worked at Dot's Place for 40 years. She told me she had seen the interstate change everything. When the interstate came through, she said, the old highway became a ghost road. The traffic that used to stop in Hayes Center just vanished. The motels closed. The gas stations went out of business. The only reason Dot's Place survived was because the truckers still came. They knew about the diner from word of mouth. They appreciated the homemade pie and the strong coffee, but even the truckers were fewer than they used to be. Now there were big chain truck stops at the interstate exits, with showers and laundry and satellite TV. The independent diners were dying. Carol pointed to a faded photograph on the wall. It showed the main street of Hayes Center in the 1950s, crowded with cars and people. Every Saturday night the town was packed, she said. Farmers came in from the country. Families shopped at the general store. Kids played in the street. It was a community. Now the street is empty. The young people leave and never come back. The high school closed 10 years ago. The only new building is a grain elevator on the edge of town, and that is run by a corporation from Omaha. The money goes out and nothing comes in. I asked her why she stayed. She laughed and said someone has to keep the coffee hot. She said the diner was her life. She knew every regular customer by name, knew their stories, their struggles. She had watched children grow up and leave, watched old men die. The diner was an anchor in a town that was slowly unwinding. She said the highway may have taken away the traffic, but it also brought in a few travelers who stopped by accident, people like me who wanted to hear a story. She said the stories were what mattered. I thought about that as I drove away, heading east toward the dawn. The Great Plains are full of people like Carol, who stay because they love the land, or because they have no choice, or because they refuse to let go. They are the keepers of memory, the ones who hold the thread of continuity. The highway is the needle that stitches the region together, but the thread is the people. Without them, the fabric of the plains would unravel. I remembered another story, told to me by a woman named Maria in a small town in western Kansas. She was a schoolteacher born and raised in the same county. She told me that when she was a child, her father had taken her to see the construction of the interstate. She remembered the bulldozers and the steamrollers and the men in hard hats. She remembered the excitement. The highway was progress. It was the future. But her father had also warned her that progress often comes with a cost. He said the highway would make the world smaller, but it would also make the town emptier. He was right. Maria taught history at the local high school, now closed. She had a collection of oral histories from the old-timers, recordings of their voices talking about the Dust Bowl, the railroad, the coming of the highway. She played one for me. It was an elderly man named Henry, who had been a farmer all his life. He said the interstate was a good thing for his farm because he could get his grain to market faster, but he also said it destroyed the sense of place. Before the highway, he had to travel on winding two-lane roads that passed through every little town. He knew the names of the towns, the names of the people. After the interstate, he just drove straight through, never stopping. He lost touch. The highway, he said, made him a stranger in his own land. I think about that often. The interstate is a machine for moving things quickly, but it is not designed for lingering. It is a road of motion, not of dwelling. And yet the plains are a place of dwelling, of deep roots, of slow time. The tension between these two forces shapes everything. The highway is a kind of violence to the old rhythms. It compresses space and time, but it also compresses meaning. The exit signs become just symbols, not places. The towns become just dots on a map, but there is also a beauty in that compression. I remember driving across the high plains of the Texas Panhandle, where the highway runs dead straight for miles, and the only change is the color of the sky. I saw a thunderstorm building in the distance, a dark wall of rain and lightning. I pulled over and watched it approach. There was nothing else around, just the road and the storm and the endless land. It was a moment of pure solitude, the kind of solitude that only the plains can offer. The highway had brought me there, but it was the land that held me. I think the land always wins. The concrete cracks, the asphalt heaves, the grass pushes through. The interstate is only a thin layer on the surface. Beneath it is the ancient earth, the millions of years of sediment, the bones of bison, the roots of prairie grass. The highway changed the Great Plains, but it did not erase them. The plains are still a place of extremes, of vastness, of silence. The highway is just one more story in a long history of stories. I think of the Native Americans who crossed this land long before any roads. I think of the wagon trains, the railroads, the Dust Bowl refugees. Each wave of travelers left a mark, and each mark faded. The interstate will fade too, eventually. In 1,000 years, maybe some archaeologist will dig up a fragment of concrete and wonder what it was. But the wind will still blow, the grass will still grow, and the sky will still be big. I stop at a small cemetery in eastern Colorado near the town of Cheyenne Wells. The graves date back to the 1880s. Many are children, victims of diphtheria, whooping cough, influenza. The oldest stones are worn smooth, the names unreadable. I walk among them, reading the ones I can. Here lies Mary, wife of John, aged 22. Here lies baby Samuel, aged 1 year. Their lives were hard and brief. They lived without highways, without electricity, without any of the things we take for granted. And yet they endured. They built communities, they raised families, they buried their dead. The land shaped them, and they shaped the land. I think about the people who will come after us. Will they know the Great Plains as a place of high-speed travel, of truck stops and rest areas and billboards? Or will they see it differently? The renewable energy revolution is already changing the look of the plains. The wind turbines are as tall as the grain elevators, and the solar farms spread across the fields like silver lakes. The interstate carries the workers and the parts. It is a new kind of agriculture, a harvest of electrons instead of wheat. The plains are becoming a power plant for the nation. It is another cycle, another adaptation. I meet a young engineer named Rachel at a wind farm near Kimball, Nebraska. She is in her late 20s, with a degree in mechanical engineering from a university in Colorado. She told me she grew up in a small town in Iowa, but she moved to the plains for the job. She loves the wide-open spaces, the quiet, the stars at night. She said the wind farm is like a second-generation version of the highway. It requires a network of roads to build and maintain, and it connects the plains to the rest of the world in a new way. She sees the turbines as sculptures, beautiful in their simplicity. She said she feels like she is part of something important, something that will outlast oil and coal. I ask her if she thinks the plains will ever be repopulated. She thinks for a moment, then says, maybe not in the old way. the old towns are dying. But new communities are forming around the energy industry. There are temporary worker camps, RV parks, even a few new subdivisions. It is a different kind of settlement, more mobile, more transient. But it is still people, still life. The highway makes it possible. I drive on, thinking about the future. The highway will not disappear. It will evolve. Perhaps it will become a corridor of electric charging stations, of autonomous vehicles, of drone delivery ports. Perhaps the rest stops will become community centers, with libraries and gardens and solar canopies. The plains are a blank canvas, and the highway is the brush. The painting is never finished. I reach the end of my journey at the Missouri River, where the landscape changes from dry prairie to green hills. I stop at a scenic overlook and look back at the road behind me. It stretches westward, diminishing into a thin line that disappears over the horizon. I think of all the miles, all the towns, all the people. The highway is a thread that weaves together a region of contradictions, emptiness and abundance, silence and roar, despair and hope. It is not good or bad, it is just a road. But it is our road, the road that changed the Great Plains and the road that keeps changing them. I get back in the car, start the engine, and pull onto the asphalt. The tires hum a familiar song. The sun is setting behind me and the sky is a blaze of orange and purple. I have no destination now. I am just driving, listening to the wind, watching the land unfold. The highway has become part of me, and I part of it. And that, I realize, is the real truth. We are all travelers, all pilgrims, all stories. The highway is the page, and we are the words. So drive on, friend. The road is long, and the plains are wide. Keep your eyes open. There is always something worth seeing just beyond the next exit.